Thank you everyone for waiting and for being here in this Agrarian Change seminar. We're very happy to have Soledad today. You probably know my name is Enrique Castañón. I'm a lecturer in international development at UCL, and I'm also part of the Journal of Agrarian Change editorial team. I'm joined today with two colleagues, Daniel Ortiz and Amod Shah, who are also part of the journal. And there's another co-organizer, Shreya Sinha, who is going to join at some point, perhaps, but I want to recognize that this is kind of a team effort. So glad that you join us today for the seminar. Soledad, as you read from the blurb, is coming from Zurich. She is currently a postdoctoral researcher there in the economic geography group. She has a PhD in environmental science and technology from the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology in Barcelona, Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. Her research focuses on plantations, pesticides, waterscapes from a very interdisciplinary perspective. As I understand, Sol is going to present today sort of a mix of recent work, so very excited to hear about that. So that's Sol. Before I give you the floor, just a few ground rules. We are recording the session, as you're aware, so if you don't want to be recorded, so just be mindful of that and do not open your video. But if you're happy and during the Q&A session, you can interact either raising your electronic hand and we'll give you the floor to sort of interact. There are conditions here, so Solly will be able to hear you. Alternatively, what you could also do is to just write in the chat function and Daniel will have a look and so that we make sure that we interact well. Solly, you will have 45 minutes up to an hour, and after that, we should have plenty of time for a Q&A. So yes, thank you again, and Solly, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes. So hi everyone. I will present Agrarian Waterscapes, unpacking the presence of pesticide residues in the Diquís Delta in Costa Rica. Having still technical issues, sorry. Okay. Thank you. So I have a disciplinary background. I am actually an environmental scientist and a political ecologist and a critical agrarian scholar. My research is on water, tropical plantations, and pesticides. And one question that I have, that is a question many of us have in Costa Rica, is actually how did we get here? And what would I mean with that? So Costa Rica is a highly biodiverse country with around 20% of its territory under conservation schemes. Yet it remains among the world's most pesticide-reliant countries, is the first global pineapple exporter, and is the second global bananas exporter. So we have like this very intensive pesticide use, and part of like the questions of many of us is like, how did we get to this situation of like pervasive pesticides everywhere? So this research that I'm presenting today is part of a broader social struggle and a political agenda of many of us confronting plantation agriculture in Costa Rica, and also the intensive pesticide use in Costa Rica. So it's a question that is my question, but it's a collective question also. I will first introduce the conceptual framework of agrarian waterscapes. Second, I will focus on pesticide presence in the environment, presenting a study that I conducted on tropical ecotoxicology in the southern Pacific of Costa Rica. Third, I will share insights from distinct angles into the findings of this study, offering a glimpse into additional research I have conducted on pesticide regulation, the dialectical relationship between plantations and pesticides, plantations and delta, and the chemicalization of agriculture. And lastly, I will bring some closing remarks on agrarian waterscapes. So to start, Waterscapes scholarship is anchored in the political ecologies of water, and together with related concepts such as aerosocial territories, examines the material outcomes of the interplay between social and biophysical processes. And it builds on two core geographical ideas, landscapes and territories, to explore how these processes are co-produced over time and over space. And the concept of waterscapes was first coined and theoretically elaborated by Eric Swingendow in 1999 as a way to understand how water and society are deeply intertwined. And it draws from geographical theories on the production of space and the production of nature, as well from science and technology studies, particularly the notion of socio-natural hybridity. And in the figure you see here, it is Swingendow's original illustration of the production of a waterscape as a process in which representational, material, and ideological practices converge. Processes that we can trace through language, social relations, discursive constructions, and biochemical and physical transformations. And what I notice, however, is that while the literature often recognizes biochemical and physical processes as integral to the making of a waterscape, they are rarely analyzed through concrete empirical or methodological engagement. And moreover, as Flaminio et al. Have shown in their literature review on political ecologies of water, agriculture remains surprisingly marginal, with only about 10% of studies addressing it directly. And yet, agriculture accounts for the vast majority of global water withdrawals and also impacts water bodies through processes such as sedimentation and also contamination. So this is not only just a matter of water usage, but of the shifting, accelerating dynamics of biochemical transformations. So you can see here actually how in this representation, it's part like, it's also included the biochemical physical processes. To analyze, but yet at the other hand, to analyze biochemical transformations in agriculture through water bodies, a central concept is the pesticide complex, the global pesticide complex. So the term was introduced by Ryan Galt, and it refers to all aspects of pesticide life cycles, from their production and commercialization to their use, regulation, and also to their environmental fate. And through our collaboration in the Pesticide Research Network, we have built on this concept also as an analytical framework to study the relationship among agricultural practice, the agrochemical industry, regulatory action, and knowledge of toxicity. And it allows us to think across scales, connecting how pesticides are produced and marketed with how they are used, contested, and experienced in a specific agrarian context. At the global level, transformations in the pesticide complex are shaping new dynamics of agrarian change and increasingly affecting water bodies. So only between 2008 and 2018, global pesticide use rose by about 20%, with especially sharp increases across the global south. And this growth has been driven by agricultural intensification, the emergence of pest and pathogen resistance, and the rise of generic or off-patent pesticides. So the so-called generics revolution has expanded across to low-cost inputs, particularly in the global south, but it has also intensified the uneven distribution of the social and environmental harms that are associated with pesticide use. And water bodies are especially vulnerable because once discharged pesticides degrade far more slowly than in soils. And yet, despite this vulnerability, there is still very limited research on the effects of pesticide contamination, and specifically and mainly in tropical environments. And scholars of the global pesticide complex have examined the industry from upstream production to downstream use and regulation, often portraying environmental fate, which is what happens when chemicals enter soils, sediment, and water, as the last mile of pesticide life cycles. And my own work takes this as a starting point, focusing on this downstream environmental dimension to understand how pesticides interact with and transform agrarian waterscapes. So building on the notion of waterscapes, I am elaborating the concept of agrarian waterscapes to explore how agrarian and aerosocial processes are co-produced. Agrarian waterscapes brings critical agrarian studies and political ecologies of water into dialogue, offering a way to trace the social and ecological relations that extend well beyond the boundaries of agricultural farms. And I conceptualize agrarian waterscapes as dynamic aquatic socio-environmental systems that shape and are shaped by agrarian transitions and biochemical processes, which are historically and especially produced. And through agrarian waterscapes, I have examined how agrarian capital shapes and is shaped by socio-ecological relationships and rural livelihoods. So agrarian waterscapes provide an opportunity to trace the mutual implication of water, chemicals, ecologies, and society through attention to agriculture as a dynamic process at the interface of aquatic and terrestrial political ecologies. And they can therefore provide a key entry into the global pesticide complex. To examine this empirically, I use an interdisciplinary approach combining environmental and social science methods, including over 100 interviews, field visits to plantations and smallholder areas, and participatory activities such as workshops. And together, these methods help me trace why and how pesticide-contaminated waterscapes are produced and lived in Costa Rica. In this presentation, I will use pesticide exposure and disruption in a tropical wetland as an entry point to show how this connects with pesticide regulation and socio-natural relationships. And due to time constraints, I will focus on the ecotoxicology side of the study to then show the importance of including different perspectives. So in this illustration, you will see like how I will guide the presentation. I will start by regulation, that is what you see in the top right represented of the illustration, then how like these molecules are registered, and like they are like applied into the plantation, they circulate to water environments, and also like they permeate people's livelihoods in this case in a tropical delta. I will base this part of the presentation on the article Tracking Pesticides from Upstream Plantations to Native Bivalves in a Tropical Wetland Habitat in Costa Rica. And actually this article was published yesterday, so it's very nice to be presenting this today. And I led this co-author study that assessed the current levels and distribution of pesticide residues in the Terraba Sierpe wetland and their impact on the bivalve mollusk Anadara tuberculosa. The study area is the Diquís Delta, which is located in the southern Pacific of Costa Rica, which you can see in the map. And here is like in this delta, it is also located a protected area, which is called the Terraba Sierpe wetland, and it's a Ramsar site that contains the largest mangrove in Central America, shown on the left side of the map. And it has two main hydrological systems, one that is influenced by the Terra River, the largest basin in the country, and another influenced by the Sierpe River that, well, I cannot point now, but I hope that you are capable of seeing like both basins in the map. And the wetland opens to the sea into 7 river mouths that are represented in the map, like Boca Coronado, Boca Nueva, Boca Brava, Boca Chica, Boca Zacate, Boca Guatemala, and Boca Sierpe. And what we did is that we evaluated a total of six sampling sites in the dry and in the rainy season. And the sampling sites were defined to compare both areas of influence following a possible gradient of contamination from upstream river waters toward the river mouths. And we also did, we did 3 extra sampling campaigns upstream river waters. So maybe if I do like this, can people see it? Yeah. So can I, okay, can I, yeah. So we did like some extra sampling campaigns in this area. So what is marked, or what you see in red are actually pineapple plantations. that are located in all these like upstream river waters. And what you see in orange are the oil palm plantations. And this is the Terra River, which is the largest basin in Costa Rica. And here is the Sierpe River, and they connect in these wetlands. And as a control site, we use S1, which is this one, with the assumption that it was free of pesticide contamination, because it is located like kind of like more far with the plantations, and it is also part of like it's nearby a national park, so we presume that it was mainly like it could be free of contamination. And we took samples of piangua, which is a native bivalve mollusk, only in 3 sites. It is actually where it is located, that is S4, S3, and S1 that are like, that is the control site. And piangua, this is important. Piangua is the main source of livelihood in the mangroves. So it is not only a bioindicator, but also a very important species for local communities. So actually in the upper map, you can see where there is a presence of this mollusk in the Americas. So all these points is like where it has been like detected or identified the presence of this mollusk. And what we hypothesize is that the Terra River influence area will concentrate pesticide residues, which is something that social organizations have been claiming, but that the state has unattended in a context of systemic hiding of data and also of information. And also, for the sake of this presentation, I'm not focusing on the social science methods of the research. Interviews along the middle and lower watershed of the Terra River represented a critical aspect of this work. And also, like for studying deltas, requires also to acknowledging and understanding their relationality, as deltas are embedded in and interconnected with larger environments. So to explore the making process of the waterscape, what I did is that I conducted semi-structured interviews throughout the middle and lower basin. And you can see the course of the river on the map. Like this. So I held interviews in 4 main areas. First in fisher folk villages here, in the mangroves located in the green area in the map. Then smallholder plots or parcelas in Spanish located in the more terrestrial part of the delta. That is actually like circled here in brown. And indigenous territories circled in orange. They are like more like in the middle part of the basin. And communities neighboring plantations circled in green here in the upper part of the basin, which is actually the middle basin. Like exactly like you can see how they are like actually surrounded by pineapple plantations. And so we identified and quantified pesticide residues in water, in sediment, and also in piangua. And in addition to that, we applied a battery of 6 different biomarkers to evaluate their biochemical responses in piangua, to compare enzymatic activities and lipid peroxidation of the organisms from the 3 river mouths. And like, so the idea of this is to see like through the health of these organisms, how it is the health of the ecosystem. So our results confirm the hypothesis, evidencing how pesticide presence in the Terra River influence area is notoriously higher than in Sierpe. So it is like actually what we found in the area of Terra influence is what you see here in the left column. And then next to this column, you can see what appeared in the area of influence of Sierpe River, that is here. And yeah, and actually Sierpe River is less exposed to the pesticides that that come from the plantations upstream, but closer also to the oil palm plantations. That this was something that we were like doubting, okay, like what is the influence of these different types of plantations? And furthermore, we found a presence in upstream river waters of the same substances in a higher concentration, evidencing a gradient of contamination. So it is what you see in the column of the right. And the pesticides found in higher concentrations were diuron, carbendazim, ametrine, and diazinon. And some of the key findings are that 71% of the pesticide load is associated to pineapple plantations based on our diagnostic that estimates pesticide use per agricultural crop. And we found pesticides accumulating in the sediment, principally diuron, which pineapple plantations use in estimated amounts of 3.5 kilograms of active ingredient per hectare per year. And also pianguas in S4, that is exactly where you can see that received like the greatest load of contamination. These pianguas exhibit biochemical alterations, so biomarkers of exposure, such as cholinesterase and GST, were actually like evidencing like more affectation and statistically significant difference. And also geographical distribution and seasonal behavior. So pesticides concentrated, of course, in the terroir influence area and appear mainly in the rainy season where there's like more runoff of pesticides. So we found residues from clomazone and herbicide in the reference site. So my reflection on this is that it evidences the ingenuity sometimes of this type of environmental science research that aims to find a non-polluted control site when we know actually from a social science perspective how pervasive pesticides are in the environment. So like this idea of like, okay, we will find a pristine place to be compared. And lastly, we use a native tropical bioindicator as Piangua as a contestation to knowledge politics, which mainly use temperate climate species to create international guidelines. So this is a pioneer study evaluating the suitability of this mollusk as a bioindicator. And this is where the story ends in the ecotoxicology study. So I now use these findings to show how it is important to analyze them from different perspectives. So the first perspective is the one of pesticide regulation. That is a key angle to see how this connects with it. And the presence of pesticide residues in the environment is linked to their registration, which authorizes their sale and use in agriculture. So pesticide contamination exacerbates the long-standing tension in Costa Rica between preservation and exploitation. And this is something that scholars on political ecologies and conservation have been studying, like this nexus between preservation and exploitation, how more than a contradiction, actually they are like operating together and enhancing or deepening each other. And it's part of like this, like of the sustainable development model of Costa Rica. And together with Marion Warner, I have examined the country's pesticide registration system, which has been in crisis, ironically, for nearly 2 decades. So like this crisis of registration system in a place that has such an intensive pesticide use. So regulatory struggles within the state intersect with tensions within the pesticide industry, particularly between generic firms and R&D multinational companies. And these conflicts, together with the interventions of environmental movements, have in practice blocked the pesticide registration system. And in this context, the boundaries of the state are continually negotiated, transversed, blurred, and reestablished. But rather than viewing this situation as an administrative failure, we conceptualize its persistent dysfunction as a form of governance, which we call regulation by impasse. And this impasse is sustained by ongoing disputes that reproduce rather than resolve the gridlock. And as a result, what we have is that 1,800 pesticide registrations remain valid, even though they do not comply with current regulations requiring complete environmental and health risk data. Since this requirement was not in place before 2006, the decree that established these requirements. So as a consequence, decades-old substances that were approved with no risk evaluation and are restricted or banned elsewhere are legally sanctioned to circulate in and through the water, soil, non-human organisms and bodies of farmers, farm workers, and communities throughout the country. So the ecotoxicology study actually provides another perspective on these dynamics. And we detected, for example, carbofuran that was banned in Costa Rica since 2015, and also bromacil that is banned in Costa Rica since 2017 in surface waters of the Delta. So these results do not indicate, I think that it's not that they are indicating chemical persistence, but rather the continued use and circulation of these banned compounds. So by combining political, economic, and environmental approach, we obtain sort of like mirror perspectives on the same process. Like, so while social and institutional analysis reveals how regulatory ambiguity enables the circulation, environmental monitoring makes the circulation materially visible in the waterscape and actually see how this is actually being contradicted. So together, these methods expose the distance between what is said to be controlled and regulated and what is actually applied and present in the environment. A second angle of analysis is the dialectical relationship between plantations and deltas, since it is not just a matter of pesticide presence in the aquatic ecosystem, but also how plantations have historically and spatially shaped the delta and the Terra River Basin. So plantations extend beyond their former territory, as we saw early, through the pesticide residues from pineapple plantations that travel actually nearly 70 kilometers downstream from their point of origin. And I examined this process more deeply in an article published in the Journal of Peasant Studies, where I analyzed the historical and geographical boundaries of plantations, focusing on and following the accumulation of pesticide and sediments, but also of capital, water flows, and socio-ecological interactions and disruptions. And this has been a community engaged research, and that ecotoxicology study became possible thanks to earlier ethnographic work and also because of my involvement in agrarian movements, which built trust, reciprocity, and solidarity across the territories. And at the same time, the fieldwork for the ecotoxicology study opened in conversations that will have not emerged in a formal interview setting. And the results of the ecotoxicology study also complement the ethnographic findings. And in this picture, you can see Adriana and Venancio. They are like they are shell harvesters or piangueros, piangueras in Spanish, and they also participated in the monitoring campaigns. And in this area, the United Fruit Company operated from 1934 onward. So this is also very important to understand, like actually the formation of this waterscape of the Delta and further on or like beyond. The United Fruit Company was a US-based transnational corporation that dominated banana production and trade across Latin America throughout much of the 20th century, profoundly shaping the region's agrarian structures, labor regimes, and state formation through its control over land, infrastructure, and export economies. And the United Fruit Company, or also we call it UFCO, modified the waterscape to meet the needs of the plantation, establishing infrastructures and spatial patterns that continue to shape the Delta today. It transformed the area into a hybrid of the plantation's engineered hydraulic system of canals and drainage with the delta's natural geomorphology of estuaries and mangroves. And in the 60s, the United Fruit Company created a hydro system for drainage and irrigation to be able to maintain intensive banana production in a flood-prone tropical delta, which is highly vulnerable to climatic events. So to do this, the company diverted the course of the Terra River, functioning as an irrigation system in the dry season and a drainage system in the rainy season. And this connected the two main watersheds of the Terra and Sierpe rivers, creating a new configuration for the discharge of effluents through a set of canals and estuaries. And what happened is that in the 80s, the UFCO ceased banana production, and it intentionally destroyed the water infrastructure, leaving it in a ruined state of operation. However, the diversion of the river, the irrigation canal, and its intricate network of waterways and estuaries remained. And this has led to a change in the flooding pattern and the discharge of sediment and pesticides from the Terra River through the plots or parcelas in Palmar Sur, eventually flowing into the Pacific Ocean. And in 2017, there was a tropical storm, Nate, that provoked a massive flood in the Delta. And this resulted in a catastrophic situation, leaving behind a devastating aftermath. And state institutions have been managing disaster and risk in the dark, as the United Flood Company never provided to the state the hydrogeological studies. So moreover, the floods have put in sharp relief how the deteriorated water infrastructure inherited from the banana plantation endured in the socio-spatial configurations of the Delta. Currently, we can see how the plantation is still kind of determines the space, because it remains the plantation green hydraulic infrastructure or the hydraulic logic through this spatial composition, that there's still this grid of canals. So as Alejo said, that he's a smallholder that lives here in the Delta, and that there is a part of the Delta. We live between ditches. It is complicated because if I throw something in my ditch, then I might contaminate other plots. So actually now that each plot is surrounded by canals and they are all connected. So in the picture, we can see one of these divisions that are, you can see how between each plot there is a canal. And I have also examined what occurs beyond the apparent limits of plantations by following effluent flows and the movement of sediments and pesticide residues from different existing plantations located upstream to the downstream delta. And this is important to understand or to mention that in the 1980s, upstream large-scale pineapple production inaugurated a new pattern of capital and sediment accumulation. Pineapple monocrop involves a set of agricultural techniques that are highly detrimental to the soil, such as bare soil practices supported by the high use of herbicides. And this led to high patterns of soil erosion in the area, where the soil has a very intense red color due to its high content of iron. So this is the color of the soil, the one you can see in the picture. So downstream up to the delta and mangroves in the 80s, red sediment began to appear. And the presence of the sediment caused the disappearance of mollusks, such as piangua, obstruction of canals and waterways, impediment of aquatic transport, and ecological disruption of the aquatic ecosystems. And moreover, sediments and flows reverberate in the flooding episodes, intertwining risk and concerns. And the flooding inundated accumulated deposits of sediment and pesticides from old, but also from recent plantations, and the breakdown of the water infrastructure together, comprising material legacies of historic state and corporate neglect. Okay. And past and present plantations have made and remade also subjects and territories in the waterscapes. The loss of the river, its degradation and pollution have had different meanings and implications. In communities neighboring pineapple plantations, the sense of loss of the river and the deterioration of local livelihoods is entangled with the general rise of violence, as Violeta well said, dry rivers, full prisons. For indigenous peoples, the river reflects a devotion to life, but not solely a cheerful one, but also challenging and disputed life. As one of the elders of the Boruca indigenous territory said, our childhood was a battered childhood, a very hard one. The river is life, but a battered life. We have to respect the river, but we shall not trust in it. In his words, we see how the struggle for life embodies the complexity of life itself. and how interdependence might also represent a union of sorrow and belonging. For parceleros and parceleras or smallholders occupying the former banana plots, this connection is also challenging as they are trying to cultivate lands that are highly deteriorated with diseases and pests inherited from the banana industry, such as black sigatoka disease or nematodes. And although this agrarian movement has longed for pesticide-free agriculture, it has not been so easy to achieve nor to reach consensus. So the same waterways that serve one day to divide the land between them also connect one plot to another, generating disputes over pesticide use. Because, for instance, if I use pesticides in my plot, also it will affect or circulate to other plots in the area. And last but not least, for shell harvester of piangüeros and piangüeras living downstream in the mangroves, everything is deeply connected as they have observed a marked difference between the dry season and wet season, and the increasing pesticide runoff with the rain that leads to the seasonal disappearance of piangua exacerbated by the floods. So in their interviews, they were constantly talking about the disappearance and shrinking of the piangua since the beginning of the large-scale pineapple production, and also like being very, very trying like very focused on how red sediment from the plantation soils covered the mangrove, and also making like these visible interconnections between agrarian production and hydrological dynamics and the lives of those that inhabit the wetland. So this is also like this connects also with more the ecotoxicology part of the study, because actually like what we see in the pesticide residues, this is like the other side of what it also represents for those that are like living there and whose livelihoods are connected to these wetland and mangroves. So the third angle is how the presence of pesticides in the environment results from the long chemicalization of Costa Rican agriculture and pesticide dependency, which is also a plantation legacy in the Southern Pacific region. And together with Myron Warner in the article, The Pesticide Chip, Chemical Legacies and Agrarian Futures in Costa Rica, we have analyzed the process of chemicalization of agriculture in 3 periods. The first period, from early 1900s to the 1940s, covers the installation of plantations and infrastructures towards chemicalization. So at the beginning of the 1900s, as I said before, the United Fruit Company installed like this intensive large-scale banana production in Costa Rica, but also incubated plant pathogens that thrive due to the homogenization of monocrop plantations, and this led to the first massive applications of pesticides. A second period is the one between 1940s and 1970s, that was a period of pesticide intensification. And this is also like the phase of Costa Rica's engagement with the Green Revolution, that I always like to say that Costa Rica was a very active, as Mexico, place for the Green Revolution, because sometimes the Green Revolution is portrayed as like a top-down process, like from the global north to the global south, as in the global south, like not being part, like having agency, just like passively receiving the Green Revolution. And actually it was not like that. And the connection between Costa Rica and the Green Revolution is that in the moment of the invasion of the Canal of Panama, Costa Rica signed an agreement to feed the army that was occupying the canal. And then in return, Costa Rica was going to receive agricultural technology. And this is how also like it began like the installment and the inauguration on many tropical agricultural centers that were like pioneering or making also this like architecture of the Green Revolution. And this is the moment also when it started the pesticide treadmills, like this intensification of pesticide use. The pesticide treadmill means how like once you disrupt an agroecosystem with pesticides, then it generates dependency and then, but also resistance, then you need to use other pesticides maybe, then you can have other pests or pathogens, and then you enter into this vicious circle. So this phase of the chemicalization was one of pesticide intensification. And a third period of this chemicalization was from 1980s to the present, with the emergence of new monocrops, the so-called non-traditional export crops. We like to call them neoliberal crops. And these crops generated new configurations of plants, of technological packages, and agricultural capital. So it was like the emergence. Actually, the oil palm was born in the banana plantation, and since the 50s, United Fruit Company was testing like how to switch to oil palm, and in the 80s, the official message was that the company was leaving the area, but they didn't leave. They just shift to oil palm, but generated like this idea of abandonment. So this is actually what you were seeing in the map, like all these orange plantations of oil palm that actually inherited the United Fruit Company, and also this is a moment of the emergence of the pineapple plantations that have us as the first global pineapple exporter today. And so in this illustration, you can see what we call a patchwork of fixes of banana monocrop. And monocrops, as I was saying before, are deeply fragile agroecosystems due to the large-scale cultivation of a single cultivar. And from our understanding, monocropping enhances susceptibility to pests and pathogens, and on the other hand, it reduces susceptibility of pests and pathogens to biocides. So we thus consider susceptibility as both generated but also appropriated. And to illustrate this, you can see you can see the emergence of the first diseases, yellow sigatoka, which was addressed with a chemical fix applying inorganic pesticides, and fusarium wilt, which led to the movement of the United Fruit Company from one region of the country, from the Caribbean to another, to the Pacific. This is actually why the United Fruit Company settled in the Pacific in 1934, in the absence of a chemical fix. So they did this spatial fix, but then the industry, given the persistence of fusarium wilt, the banana industry developed a new banana variety, which is the Cavendish cultivar, that is the one that runs the market nowadays. And however, this generated susceptibility to nematodes, to another pathogen that causes the black sigatoka disease, and also to insects, which triggered a pesticide treadmill. So this is the phase I was talking before of pesticide intensification. And in the past decade, the pathogen that causes fusarium wilt has been threatening the banana agro-industry again due to its transformation into a new strain, and the outcome, which is not yet known whether if it will result in another biotechnological fix. But this is like what I heard from the industry, is that actually they are trying to develop new varieties resistant to this, but there are also plenty news about the crisis of the global banana production. And this monocrop-induced susceptibility to pests and pathogens, and the patchwork of fixes to address this over time, has produced uneven chemical geographies, which in the Delta articulate with subjectivities and social struggles over working conditions, chemical exposures, and land. And also it's important to mention that plantations are also live experimentation sites, like that sometimes it's portrayed as a homogeneous and simple process, but with a patchwork of fixes, what we try to illustrate it, how it is actually a very precarious way of sustaining the system, and also that this very precarious hegemony in some kind of way. And pesticide residues and legacies have accumulated in soils, in organisms, in life histories, conditioning subsequent strategies of capitalist agriculture, and the possibilities for people whose livelihoods are tied to the land and to carve out alternative paths within these chemicalized land and waterscapes. And smallholders, the ones that I was showing in the figure that are like in the terrestrial part of the delta, they are also peasant workers living there because they have occupied and reclaimed former banana lands since the cessation of banana production in the 80s. And this agrarian movement has tried to defy the plantation legacies, the plantation logics, and also the chemicalization of agriculture, very inspired by agroecology as a means to build autonomy and also a means to build sovereignty. Yet they deal with three intersecting challenges. First, the contemporary low-cost pesticide commercialization that is connected with what I was saying before on the global pesticide complex. Also pathogen and chemical inheritances, including pesticide-dependent environments. And for instance, what I was saying before, nematode infestation in the soil, that this is an inheritance of the banana enclave. And also the attachments to pesticide use that we call this the pesticide chip, chip as a microchip. And with this, we refer as a mindset that is also a legacy of the banana enclave and of the banana plantations. So we show the history of chemicalization in and of agriculture as material and symbolic layers, and symbolic as what I was saying before, as this like subjective attachment to pesticide use, which makes more difficult like to like the transformation of to alternative paths. So to conclude, pesticide residues are more than the last mile of pesticides life cycles. Pesticide residues respond to place regulatory instruments and politics, the expansion and transformation of plantations, and the material, subjective, and institutional reach of the chemicalization of tropical agriculture. And their presence disrupts socio-natural relationships, from altering a mollusk to the loss of livelihoods of fishers and other inhabitants of contaminated waterscapes, whose lives are connected to the rivers and the wetlands. And through Agrarian Waterscapes, we can see how pesticide contamination is part of an ongoing making of agrarian water environments, and it brings into focus the state's regulatory struggles, the dialectical relationship between plantations and deltas, and the everyday experiences of those living in the Diquís Delta and the Anadara River Basin, and how these are mutually shaped by transformations of agrarian capital. And also that inter and transdisciplinary research helps to see a bigger picture that does not fit quantitative ideals of integration. And what do I mean with this? It's a big picture that does not necessarily fit all together. And I remember when someone was telling me at the beginning of the ecotoxicology study to generate an indicator of like from 1 to 10 on how people experience risk, so we could contrast it with what we are finding in the water, in the sediment, as a way of like this is something what is like this idea of integration of like people's life experiences with more like material framings of research, and more from an environmental science perspective. And what I'm trying also to defend here is that sometimes like it doesn't have to fit all together, and it makes actually the story like more complete, even if it's like a puzzle that doesn't fit like in perfect pieces. And it is like, yeah, more complex in that way. So I enjoyed that before. So yeah, thank you very much with this, I think.
Sorry.
45.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much, Sole, for that. We all certainly appreciate the intervention. I gotta say, it was a very sort of rich, grounded account of agrarian waterscapes in Costa Rica. I personally really like the way you sort of integrated biology and social science. You know, it's much needed to do that. So I found that not only highly interesting, but I gotta be honest, inspiring. So it's well done. So thank you very much for that. Now is the time for the usual Q&A. And I was telling Sole before that Agrarian seminars sort of characterized by really nice interaction between people. So I do expect others to interact. While people are preparing their questions, please be aware that you could either sort of open your mics and interact after you raise your hand electronically, or use the chat function if you like that, and then we will read the question for Sole. While you prepare the questions, I do have one of my own, perhaps to kick this off, if that's fine. When we think about plantations from a sort of political economy perspective, the first thing that comes to my mind, at least, is sort of labor regimes. So I was thinking if you could sort of expand on that. Tell us more about the labor regimes in these plantations, and in particular, if it's possible to sort of connect, you know, pesticide use and residues to some implications of how, you know, labor regimes have been changing throughout time. That's what I wanted to ask you. So perhaps, Sole, if you can take that first question while people prepare their own question, then we will get this interaction going. Yeah, so I'm afraid you will have to come here for the sake of the mic. So, yes, thank you.
I wanted to see it in the back. So plantations, labor regimes, and how they connect with these pesticide use implications. Yeah, like, so maybe to start, the United Fruit Company was like more intensive in terms of labor presence, and that shift of to oil palm plantations. Actually, this is something that the worker unions have been complaining a lot, because it's more mechanized. Okay. So yeah, like actually, like they from the labor unions, they actually like they have numbers. They make this comparison, because they say, okay, like you needed like, I don't know, like 7, or I don't remember the exact number, but like a certain amount of workers per hectare in the banana enclave, and with the oil palm plantation, there's like minimum. It's like very reduced. And then in the pineapple plantations is kind of similar in that way. So this is something that also like has created like a lot of nostalgia for the banana enclave, and also like it feels also like the oil palm plantations, even though they are there and you can see them, like you can see their presence, they have like less involvement in that case with the communities in the Delta. But then in the case of the pineapple plantations, it is different, and actually it changes from region to region in Costa Rica. In the Southern Pacific region, it's mainly controlled by Del Monte. And so it is like where it started, like this large scale production system actually in the Southern Pacific. So it created like a dependency, and people actually people from the communities work there. But in the northern region that is nearby the frontier, the border with Nicaragua, you have like actually researchers and scholars have been addressing how it generates also like a different relationship with migrant work. So and then in the Caribbean region, it happens something similar. So this is what I can connect with that, and also like in the what I was saying about the people that are living in the Delta and the peasant workers, that they call themselves parceleros and parceleras, that will mean like that comes from plot in English, and they have a very they were peasants that migrated to work in the banana enclave, and now they are involved also in peasantries. So they are like, they have this like more complex class differentiation also, but they are still like, they have their own plot with like that are like sometimes between 2 or 3 hectares, but also some of them are working in the plantations. So this is what I can
Thank you very much, Soledad. So as I said, we can open the floor now. Anyone would like to sort of just open your mic and ask your question at this point. Yes, Amod, please go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, thanks a lot. So it was a super interesting presentation. I really kind of I found it super nice how you kind of use that concept, like how you showed the evolution of your concept, how you kind of use the agrarian waterscapes, but then also how you then use that to kind of focus on particular aspects of the research that you did. My question is around the concept that you presented of agrarian waterscapes. I found it very helpful to also then look at different scales at which kind of these interactions are taking place and then how they kind of affect each other. Uh, I guess my question is a bit around the utility of this concept, maybe to also, you didn't talk so much about it, so it's just a question whether it's potentially relevant to also analyze some of these very classical political economy questions, right? So I'm thinking, for instance, can this concept be used to kind of look at, say, differences in how pesticide residues and pesticide presence plays out in different production systems, for instance? So you mentioned, for instance, that different commodities have kind of different footprints, right, of pesticides, but also depending on capital involved. But for instance, are there differences in terms of land ownership, uh, structures, and kind of say petty commodity production, sort of production relations, and how that affects kind of pesticide use and residues, for instance, or for instance market linkages. So it's a little bit linked, I guess, to Enrique's question also about the labor regimes, but I was wondering if you also see this as a concept which has utility to kind of expand on those aspects. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, very JAC kind of questions from the beginning. Thank you, Amod.
Can you clarify a little bit? I was trying to write it. I got lost.
Yeah, no, I think so. My question was that the concept works very well to kind of integrate the social and biophysical kind of aspects of kind of the impacts of pesticide use and its impacts, right? As well as kind of, for me, it was interesting that you were able to kind of look at very different scales of analysis also, right? So the companies involved on the ground, but also regulation aspects of it. But is this a concept which can also be then potentially applied to, say, maybe draw linkages between different forms of, for example, like land tenure? Like different regions, for instance, have maybe different land ownership structures, or kind of land reform played out in different ways in different regions, or market linkages, right? So some cases it's heavily, I'm guessing the agriculture everywhere is heavily commercialized, but in some cases those market linkages, say input providers, are very different for different commodities or different regions. So could you potentially also use this as a concept to analyze those relations and see how then they affect kind of pesticide impacts? Is that something that you, maybe if you've done already, if you want to reflect on that, or my question was more just to ask you whether you think a concept like this can be applied to also study those kind of agrarian political economy questions in a way.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's a great concept. So what I did today is that I wanted to show how I have been using it, like through regulation, to plantations and deltas, the chemicalization, but it's not necessarily that it has to be done that way, because like actually the idea is to take classic agrarian questions and to put it in dialogue into more like these ideas of the production of waterscapes that go like beyond what we understand as like the merely agrarian. As this is something that June Borges has been working on, right? Like about how sometimes like we can also see all what is more than like classically considered as agrarian, but like all these ruralities. And this is why I was also showing like everything that it's like also beyond even like the fissures or like the everything that is like beyond what the formal what could be considered like the formal terrain of the plantation. So the idea is like to trace these connections, but actually now I'm beginning a research on that is more connected with questions of land, and so yeah, it's this exercise like with seeing like this dialectic between like what you are like interested in exploring more like in terms of agrarian connections, agrarian questions of capital, of labor, of land, ecologies, through this like process of like making of landscapes, or in this case waterscapes, that I find very fascinating. Also like these two bodies of literature that sometimes like are not having like this conversation.
Thank you, sir, for that. We might have time to expand on those sort of points in just a second. I'm not sure if anybody else would like to raise your hand, or perhaps we can go now with Daniel. I think there is one question in the chat. If you want to read that one, please, and perhaps you have your own question. I don't know.
Sure. Well, Soledad, first questions, and then I also have a question of my own. This question is by Joanna Jacobi. She's asking if you can expand on your critique of the terminology of plantation on seed. You mentioned the concept. She understood that you see like some issues, but if you can expand this critique. And then my question would be more in terms of if you can expand on this idea of the pesticide ship. I found it like fascinating also in terms, because in agrarian studies, from certain approaches, we have like this assumption, right, of like peasants or smallholders or campesinos, they have like agroecological knowledge, right? So I want to understand a little bit more like this different knowledge and practices from parceleros or smallholders. Sometimes this knowledge and practices are agroecological, sometimes are related to this pesticide ships. So I want to understand also like well, this complexity from your fieldwork experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So two great questions there for you, Sole, and the rest, please do prepare your questions. We still have some time for interaction, but please go ahead.
Yes, so thanks, Johanna, for the question on plantation scene. So this is something that I address in the article of Rethinking the Plantation. I try to engage more in the article with more classic studies on plantations, but also like Central America, studies on the banana enclave, that there's like a big tradition of studies in Central America. And what I have been missing from the plantation scene is something that resonates with what many others have been highlighting, that sometimes it is very totalitarian. Also, it kind of makes this fetishization of the plantation. And of course, it has like, sometimes there's like this lack of involvement with like agrarian dynamics, that this is something that Borras, also actually I think like Bolford in one of her articles has pointed out. And there it has like sometimes important blind spots. Also the question of race, that it has been raised, this question by plenty of scholars. So for me, it was like lacking. I was more interested in going back with classic works, like including Thompson, Means, and many others that came after from the Caribbean studies, that were like also trying to understand the link with plantation and on their development, that it has been a great inspiration, like this tradition also, like in the case of Central America. So I thought it was like more nurturing in my case to engage with this long tradition than with the plantation scene, that even though there has been like call to try to understand plantations, also like the differences within plantations. I think that sometimes there's not a deep exploration of agrarian dynamics, of political economies in part of this very big scholarship that I cannot generalize it, because I will be doing the same. And also regarding the question of Daniel, thank you so much about pesticides and knowledges and practices of parceleros. This is something that we elaborate as part of my ethnographic work in the article on the pesticide chip, and it's actually how, because they have been like, as an agrarian movement, they have been very, very inspired and engaged on doing the plantation. Okay, like it was like, okay, now we have the land, we took the land, we will like develop something different, but also like, and then they had like a lot of fights because of the question of pesticide use, because of what I was explaining before. Like if I apply in my plot, it affects all other plots. This interconnectivity that is also a legacy of the plantation. So also what I have found, because what I did is that I spent one day in each plot, asking them questions about like, okay, what you are cultivating, what are your main agricultural challenges, how are you solving them, which pesticides are you been using. And what I saw is that, for instance, like many of them, like first there are like material layers, there's even synthetic twine in the soil. That's from the banana plantations. There are like copper residues so even to plant and cultivate rice, it has been very difficult for them because the soil, like there's this persistent contamination since like 70 years. And I was like very interested on how they were feeling this difficulty to quit pesticide dependency. And also many of them, they received training on agroecology, a lot of support with agroecology organizations. And also part of what has been happening is that they have been also kind of like involved in this generic revolution, because many of them have been having access to generics, but even in a very complicated way, because in other parts, in other regions of the country, they even have like pesticide vendors from generic companies that come to sell them pesticides. But in the case of parceleros, they do not, parceleros and parceleras, they do not even have that. So many of them actually, they have to go to try to have access to these generic substances. It's very confusing also, like which pesticides to use, who are you, like who is advising or giving you like suggestions about how to apply them. Of course, cases of intoxications, of confusing one insecticide with one, for instance, herbicide, no, or the opposite. Wanting an insecticide, applying an herbicide, and having the destruction of the crop because they have like very similar names, like the brand names of this of the generics are very, very, very confusing. Sometimes they even have names in English. And so there's like this hybridity of knowledge practices. Like many of them have like their own self-consuming part in their plot, and what they are trying to do because many of them are also like having like small scale crops to sell in domestic markets. So this is what is more complicated, because many of them are cultivating plantain, and plantain is also susceptible to nematodes and also to sigatoka. And this is an inheritance of the banana enclave. So it has been very difficult, what they have told me, like to try to address these without nematicides and without fungicides. And so, yeah, there is this complexity, but also many disputes. And I have to say that, like in many meetings, in the ones that I participated, actually, like the women were like fighting a lot with males, that they were like more attached with the pesticide use. Also, like this legacy of many of them were workers in the banana enclave, and actually, like women in the movement, they were like more trying to do something different, and there were like very hard confrontations on this. So it's something that is still like happening and debated on how to face this, how to undo this.
All right, thank you, Sole, for that. I wonder if anybody else would like to intervene with a question. As I said, you could just open your mic or use the chat function. Is anybody else waiting for a burning question at this point? Okay, We still have a bit more of time, and I'm sorry, but it's just I do have another question of my own. Sorry, if that's okay. As I said, I found this sort of effort of integrating social sciences with sort of ecotoxicity, sort of remote biology, if you want to simplify things, very refreshing. So I wanted to ask you if you could perhaps reflect on that process of integrating these two, that it is rare, very welcome kind of thing to do, but rare, I would argue. And if you could reflect on two levels. First, theoretically, it seems to me, for example, whenever one tries to apply Latour, although you correct me, you know more about this, but Latour tends to come at the expense of political economy in my reading of that. So how you navigate those sort of contradictions theoretically, and the other level is practically. What did you learn about, on one hand, going, tracing the pesticides as a kind of biologist kind of training, and then of course doing the critical agrarian studies, which is much more social science. I'm just very interested in that experience. If you can tell us more about the practicalities of, navigating these two worlds of within science, probably.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the part of integrating theoretically this, I think you don't need Latour. Like Zwingli has some of Latour in his original conceptualization of hybridity, but to talk about this like social natural hybridity, you don't need Latour, or like also what is the word that Donna Haraway uses? She has a term, seaworks. Anyway, so but I think like I found in Agrarian Waterscapes this way of integrating, because actually what I was showing before, like how to incorporate also a lens of that is actually analyzing the biochemical transformations, not only like saying, okay, this is actually happening, but analyzing it as a lens. So what I say is that I am using like different lenses to approach to it, and each lens is biased, which is actually what is interesting. And it's not like not recognizing also the contradictions and how bias is natural environmental sciences and how problematic it is. But actually like, okay, like what we are looking from this perspective. And I think it has been very rich because it's very different, like what people told me in the interviews versus what actually people said when we were in the terrain, or when I was actually even like discussing with state institutions. It was very different, like the explanations I obtained by asking like more specific questions, like from a social science perspective, than by saying, okay, I have this, I found this. What do you think about this presence? Like, or even I have been doing research in the past years also more about dynamics of pesticide use and pesticide import, export. So this also opens like a different perspective that I think it's possible to integrate. And this is what I have been seeing and what I found in this concept of agrarian waterscapes. And well, it is something that is still in elaboration, so I appreciate any feedback on that. But it has been also very complicated to navigate, and on this I participated recently. Rebecca Leif has a very nice book on mixed methods with Stuart Lane. And I participated recently, like at the beginning of the year, in the conversation they open on how like the difficulties of this inter and transdisciplinarity, because we are very conditioned to disciplines. So, and actually there's a non-discipline punishment if you break disciplines, and it's like complicated because there is like this push towards interdisciplinarity. But actually we were saying like, this is not something that I will necessarily advise to others, because it's such a hard way and it's such a difficult way. And also you face a lot of reject from more traditions of natural science to want to collaborate with you if you also are doing social science. There are a lot of stereotypes, a lot of like there are a lot of questions that that sometimes separate this interdisciplinary work. So actually it has been very difficult, and but this is the only way I found that I wanted to do it, because actually when I did my master in ecotoxicology, and when I was in the lab, I was like seeing so many questions, like a perspective that I found that I was needing. Okay, like what we are actually seeing, analyzing how is this working, and the insights that we can have more from a political economy perspective. And actually it has a very nice and important dialogue, and this go back to what I think Amod was talking about, more classic political economy. In the paper on regulation by impasse, actually we integrate like a more close approach of political economy with the state and the boundaries of the state, but I did it also like with my training in environmental science, allowed me to get in many of these conversations. And actually like some of the institutions of people in academia was inviting me more because of my environmental science background, because many of these discussions are interestingly happening in these places. So it has allowed me also like to move from different through different spaces.
Okay, thank you very much, Sole. I'm conscious of the fact that it's getting late in the UK and that Sole very kindly traveled from Cambridge, so probably it's kind of time to go. But I wonder if there is we have time for one last question. Not sure if anybody would like to raise something at this point. Daniel, yeah, go ahead.
I can go
for the
with
last one. Yes.
last question. Well, Soledad, you were mentioning that part of your fieldwork was like collaboration with agrarian movements, right? And then like from like a participatory approach, like some, members of the movement like took place in the research. I also wanted to, you to explore about like the challenges of doing like this kind of collaborations, because like in Latin American, at least it's like agrarian movements, like the politics is very, very much in terms of contestation, right? The peasants against the plantation, against the agribusiness, right? So from a political approach, it makes sense to approach like this tension between like the peasants and the plantation that are using like the pesticides. But from like a research approach, you kind of understand like these complexities that, well, it's like these farmers are using also pesticides, right? So it's like what are these kind of challenges in terms of, research, being a scholar, but also being like an activist and doing like this kind of collaborations, because probably, like the critical perspective in terms of showing like the contradictions within the movement may undermine the coherence of the discourse of the movement in terms of that they're like agroecological and they're like proposing alternative. So I wanted to, to mention like something about that, because it's very challenging doing this like in this kind of research and collaboration with movements.
Thank you, Daniel. So we're finishing with the Casa's question, it seems.
Yes.
Sorry.
Casa. Yes, like actually it all started when I started participating first in the anti-pesticide movement, to call it somehow. I started this like long time ago, like almost 20 years ago. And because, yeah, like as I was saying before, like many of us were so concerned about like Costa Rica being in the top of pesticide use. And then I joined this a movement that, and also an organization that is called FRENASAP, that is the National Front of Sectors Affected by Pineapple Plantations. And FRENASAP has like a long background. It comes from the movements, also like, it's not opposing necessarily, but facing the injustice of banana plantations. And so they actually, there was a switch to of cropping the movements from banana to pineapple plantations. And And we also have like many of these debates in the movement, because people from workers unions are part of the movement, and actually many of them they don't want a plantation to live. They just want better working conditions, and they want to fight, like, to respect their labor rights. And so it has been a learning process of understanding different needs, also like of the rural communities that are nearby the plantation and their kids are in the school. Like we have been, like, for instance, this year we have been having cases of kids of intoxication. You say intoxication in English? Of intoxication in schools nearby plantations. So of course people in these communities are very worried about these intoxications. But the workers, on one hand, they are like more like thinking, okay, like what we can do to be more protected, or like even like to kind of demand that, for instance, now they are fighting for due diligence, to respect the laws that are applied in the countries that are importing pineapples. So I think that actually, like, these tensions, I wouldn't say that there are different tensions between my perspective and the ones that we have. Actually, it's more about, like, I have been trying to understand, like, all these different tensions, and the part of doing research, being a scholar, like, being a scholar activist, I have been an activist before. I started in academia kind of recently, because I also, like, I've started in academia in my last 10 years, but I have been more in this other side, and I'm still in the movements. So actually everything that I do is to support the movements, and from different perspectives. And like the regulation article was more to support, okay, what is happening, what we need to understand. And even like this study on the that is more about like the ecotoxicology study. It has served as an evidence for them, and whatever they like. I presented that in Costa Rica in FRENASAP, but also in the organizations of piangueras. Also I did presentations with parceleros and parceleras. So it has been more like a part of like a giving back. And also I think that in the movements they are not denying this difficulty of actually using pesticides and wanting to move to something else. There's not this desire of being like completely coherent. And also the idea of coherence, I think it's kind of like, I don't know where it comes, like this desire of coherence, but I won't say that is something that I am seeing in people that are more in the field, something that I see more in the city, more like urban scholars wanting like this ideal coherence. It's actually very silly, like so many ways of facing challenges and contradictions and navigating this and understanding this and thinking again how to have different strategies, and this is like what is happening, I think, to many of us and many movements also.
Right. Well, thank you, Sole. With that closing reflection, I think it's a good time to stop here. So thank you very much again for that brilliant seminar. Thank you all for joining. We will have another Agrarian seminar this year, so please just we will be sending those details, and hopefully you will join us next time as well. So thank you all for coming.